They were the darlings of the silver screen, adored by millions before they could even spell Hollywood. But for many of these child stars, fame was a fleeting illusion, one that quickly gave way to heartbreak, addiction, and even death. This is not just a list. It's a haunting glimpse into how early stardom can leave scars deeper than applause can ever heal. Here are 20 Golden Age child stars whose lives ended in tragedy. Bobby Driscoll. Once hailed as Walt Disney's favorite child star, Bobby Driscoll was the golden boy of the late 1940s and early 1950s. With his sparkling eyes and natural talent, he was the perfect choice to voice Peter Pan in 1953. Audiences believed he could fly, and for a moment he truly soared. He even won a special Academy Juvenile Award for his role in The Window. But the dream quickly unraveled. As Bobby grew older, the industry's affection waned. Disney unceremoniously dropped him after Peter Pan, claiming he'd outgrown his appeal. The rejection devastated him. Struggling to adjust to life outside the spotlight, Bobby turned to drugs, first marijuana, then heroin. His once bright future dimmed under the weight of addiction and failed comeback attempts. In 1968, his body was found alone in an abandoned tenement in New York's East Village. No ID, no fanfare. Just another nameless overdose victim. He was buried in a pauper's grave on Hart Island, New York's Potter's Field. It wasn't until over a year later that his identity was confirmed. The boy who once embodied the magic of childhood was lost to a system that chews up its brightest lights. Carl Alfalfa Switzer. Carl Switzer was unforgettable as Alfalfa in The Little Rascals, with his cowlick, off-key singing, and innocent charm. He made America laugh at a time when laughter was in short supply. But behind the scenes, young Carl was already experiencing the price of fame. By the time he was a teenager, Switzer found himself typecast and unwanted. Hollywood moved on, but Carl couldn't. He tried various odd jobs, bartending, dog training, and even acting in B-movies, but the magic never returned. His adult years were riddled with financial troubles, bar fights, and brushes with the law. He was known more for his temper than his talent. In 1959, at just 31 years old, Carl was shot and killed during a heated argument over $50 and a hunting dog. The official story claimed it was self-defense, but many questioned whether the fatal bullet was the final act in a life the world had already abandoned. Alfalfa never got the happy ending he deserved. Scotty Beckett. Scotty Beckett had it all: a sweet smile, a booming career, and Hollywood's attention before he even turned 10. Starting in Our Gang comedies, he stood out with a cherubic face and natural charisma. He acted alongside stars like Judy Garland and even played the younger version of Donna Meche in The Jolson Story. It seemed like nothing could stop him until everything did. As Scotty transitioned into adulthood, the pressure of maintaining that perfect child star image took a toll. He was caught in a relentless cycle of arrests, drug use, and scandal. At one point, he even attempted suicide. His promising career devolved into tabloid headlines and mugshots. Every attempt at a comeback was met with another fall, another broken promise to himself. In 1968, at just 38 years old, he was found dead in a Los Angeles motel room, officially ruled an overdose. Some suspected foul play or suicide. Whatever the cause, Scotty's end was painfully far from the bright beginnings he once had. The Hollywood that built him had also destroyed him. Billy Laughlin. Known for his raspy, croaking voice as Froggy in The Little Rascals, Billy Laughlin was a fan favorite. His comic timing and quirky delivery made him stand out in a crowded cast. But Billy didn't just act. He owned the screen, even if only briefly. By the time he reached his teens, he had already left Hollywood behind, wanting a life out of the spotlight. That life never had a chance to begin. In 1948, at just 16 years old, Billy was riding a scooter with a friend when a car struck them in La Puente, California. Billy died instantly. His death shocked fans across the country. One minute, he was the boy with the unforgettable voice. The next, he was gone. No scandal, no drugs, just a brutal twist of fate. Billy Laughlin's death serves as a tragic reminder that even those who escape Hollywood's cruelty can still be claimed by life's randomness. Froggy's voice still echoes in reruns, but the boy behind it never got to grow up. Anissa Jones. Anissa Jones lit up television screens as the adorable Buffy on the late 1960s series Family Affair. With her signature pigtails and cherubic face, she became one of America's most beloved child stars practically overnight. At just 6 years old, Anissa was living a life most adults would envy: fame, fans, and financial success. But that kind of spotlight is blinding, especially when it comes so young. Behind the scenes, Anissa struggled. Her parents' divorce turned ugly, and legal battles over her earnings created even more instability. After Family Affair ended in 1971, her acting offers dried up. She tried to return to a normal teenage life, but her fame made that impossible. Bitter about how quickly Hollywood had moved on, she began experimenting with drugs, falling in with the wrong crowds and slipping into a world of addiction and self-destruction. At just 18, Anissa attended a party in Oceanside, California. The next morning, she was found dead in a friend's bedroom, her tiny body overwhelmed by a lethal cocktail of cocaine, PCP, Quaaludes, and other narcotics. The coroner called it one of the most severe overdoses ever seen in someone so young. What made it even more tragic was that she had recently received access to her $70,000 trust fund, a fortune for a teenager in the 1970s, and possibly the funding that accelerated her final downfall. Anissa Jones became another statistic, another child star consumed by a system that offers no safety net once the cameras stop rolling. Her ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean, a quiet farewell for a girl who once captured the heart of a nation. Jay North. Jay North embodied mischief and innocence as Dennis the Menace on the hit CBS series that ran from 1959 to 1963. With his blonde hair and toothy grin, Jay was America's troublemaker-in-chief. Millions tuned in weekly to see him torment Mr. Wilson in the most lovable way possible. But while audiences laughed, young Jay was suffering in silence. During production, his parents largely stayed out of his professional life, entrusting his welfare to his aunt and uncle, who served as his guardians on set. What no one knew until decades later was that Jay was being verbally and physically abused behind closed doors. Forced to perform and punished when he didn't meet expectations, Jay described his time on Dennis the Menace as a nightmare he couldn't escape. Once the series ended, Jay attempted to return to school, but classmates either mocked or idolized him. He didn't fit in either world. Typecasting ended his acting career early, and with no outlet for his pain, he spiraled into depression. At one point, he even considered suicide. In adulthood, Jay joined the Navy in an attempt to escape Hollywood and find meaning, but the trauma followed him. He later became an outspoken advocate for child actors, working with organizations to protect kids from the very horrors he had endured. Though Jay is still alive today, his life stands as a tragic cautionary tale of a child star whose fame masked unbearable emotional wounds. The world remembers Dennis the Menace with laughter, but Jay North remembers it in tears. Dana Plato. Though her biggest fame came in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Dana Plato's acting career started at the age of 7 in commercials and TV guest spots, making her part of the tail end of the Golden Age pipeline. She skyrocketed to fame as Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, becoming a household name and teen idol. But fame was never a comfort, it was a trap. Behind the camera, Dana's life was unraveling. Her mother pushed her into acting, and by the time Dana was a teenager, she was already struggling with substance abuse. She became pregnant at 19 and was written out of the show. From there, she entered a turbulent downward spiral: addiction, failed relationships, and financial ruin. In the 1990s, she turned to B-movies and even adult films to stay afloat. Her attempted comeback was met with ridicule, and her personal demons only grew louder. In 1999, after a bizarre radio interview where she claimed to be sober and turning her life around, Dana took a lethal dose of painkillers and Valium in her motorhome. Her death at just 34 was ruled a suicide. Her son, Tyler Lambert, would later die by suicide as well, on the eve of Mother's Day no less, completing a heartbreaking cycle. Dana Plato's story is one of early talent, crushed by the unforgiving glare of Hollywood, a girl who gave America her best smile while quietly begging for help. George Spanky McFarland. George Spanky McFarland was the round-faced leader of the Our Gang comedies, often playing the voice of reason among the gang's mischief. He began acting before he was 3, and by the age of 5, he was one of the most recognizable children in America. But as the series ended and he grew older, Spanky faced a challenge few child actors survive. What comes next? Despite his fame, roles dried up quickly as George hit adolescence. His name, forever tied to Spanky, made casting directors hesitant. No one wanted the chubby little rascal for serious roles. Feeling abandoned by the very industry that once worshipped him, he left Hollywood and joined the Air Force. Later in life, he found work in public relations and sales, making a modest living while occasionally appearing at nostalgia conventions. But privately, Spanky struggled with the weight of being remembered for a time he couldn't return to. Though he avoided the substance abuse and criminal records of some of his peers, the psychological toll of typecasting and lost identity lingered. When he died of a heart attack in 1993 at the age of 64, his legacy was frozen in black and white reruns. While the world remembered Spanky as the cheerful ringmaster of a childhood circus, George McFarlane spent much of his life trying to prove he was more than a character he played before he could read. Shirley Jean Rickert. With her platinum curls and dramatic eye expressions, Shirley Jean Rickert stood out even among the chaotic charm of Our Gang. Cast at the age of 5, she quickly became a fan favorite. She exuded confidence on screen, stealing scenes with sass and sparkle. But that early taste of fame would soon fade, leaving Shirley adrift in a world that no longer celebrated her. After her time with Our Gang ended, Shirley tried to pivot into more mature roles but found little success. Like many child actors, she discovered Hollywood was not kind to those growing up in public view. Roles evaporated, opportunities dwindled. Shirley found herself doing whatever it took to survive. She eventually turned to burlesque dancing under the name Gilda and Her Crowning Glory, a reference to her once famous hair. Though she performed with dignity and pride, it was far from the glamour of her early screen days. Shirley would later recall that she was never ashamed of her work, but the loneliness of her post-Hollywood life was undeniable. She drifted through small towns, lived in trailer parks, and worked a string of jobs far removed from the movie sets of her youth. When she passed away in 2009, the news barely made headlines. But for those who remembered her flashing grin in Our Gang, the tragedy lay in how quickly the world forgot the little girl who once brought so much joy. Mickey Rooney Jr. Being the son of one of Hollywood's biggest stars should open doors. For Mickey Rooney Jr., it closed most of them. The eldest child of Mickey Rooney and his first wife, Ava Gardner, Mickey Jr. was born into fame, but not into happiness. He started acting and singing at a young age, even appearing in Hot Rods to Hell and on the Mickey Mouse Club. But being a Rooney proved more burden than blessing. Overshadowed by his father's fame and haunted by a complex relationship with him, Mickey Jr. struggled with self-worth. He fell into a deep cycle of alcoholism and drug addiction that derailed both his acting and music careers. By the 1970s, his life was spiraling. He was arrested multiple times and reportedly lived out of cars, unable to hold down work or relationships. He did have brief stints of recovery. In the 1990s, Mickey Jr. became a born-again Christian and co-founded a ministry in Hemet, California. For a while, it seemed he had finally found peace. But demons lingered, especially those tied to childhood rejection and living in his father's long, controversial shadow. When he died in 2022 at the age of 77, Mickey Jr. left behind a complicated legacy, not as a star in his own right, but as a cautionary tale about fame by inheritance. He never fully escaped the gravitational pull of being Mickey Rooney's son, and his tragic trajectory serves as a painful reminder that fame without identity can be just as crushing as obscurity. Billy Laughlin. Billy Laughlin didn't have to speak much to be memorable. As Froggy in The Little Rascals, his odd croaking voice and bug-eyed expressions made him instantly recognizable. Billy had a natural comedic rhythm, and despite joining the cast later than the original lineup, he quickly carved a permanent place in fans' hearts. He could get a laugh just by blinking, but his time in the spotlight was short-lived. After the series ended, Billy returned to a modest life in California. Unlike some of his fellow rascals, He didn't pursue further acting. He wanted what most teenagers wanted, a normal life. In 1948, at just 16 years old, Billy was out for a ride on his new motor scooter with a friend when tragedy struck. A speeding truck hit them at an intersection. Billy died on the spot. It was a sudden, violent end for someone who had only just begun to understand life outside the studio lights. There were no drugs, no scandals, just a fatal twist of fate that silenced one of the most unique voices of the 1940s. To this day, Billy remains one of the most tragic figures in our gang history. His story reminds us that even those who avoid Hollywood's pitfalls aren't always safe from life's randomness. A life so full of laughter ended in an instant, with no second act. Peggy Ann Garner. At age 13, Peggy Ann Garner won a special Juvenile Academy Award for her heartbreaking performance in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. The film cemented her place in Hollywood's pantheon of great child actors, and many believe Peggy was destined for a long, storied career. But as with many young stars, the applause faded faster than anyone expected. As she matured, Peggy found it difficult to land adult roles. Her once praised emotional depth became less of a commodity in a system obsessed with youth and glamour. She made scattered appearances in television and stage productions, but the golden promise of her childhood stardom never materialized into sustained success. Worse, her personal life was marred by instability, 3 failed marriages, financial hardship, and battles with depression. She tried to reinvent herself several times, working behind the scenes in PR, and eventually fading almost completely from public view. But she never stopped feeling like she was supposed to have been something more. Peggy Ann Garner died of pancreatic cancer in 1984 at just 52 years old. Her passing was barely noted by an industry that once celebrated her talent. The little girl who brought millions to tears had become a ghost in her own story. Hollywood never gave her the ending she deserved, and in some ways, it never truly let her grow up. Tommy Kirk. Tommy Kirk was once the quintessential clean-cut Disney kid. Starring in Old Yeller, The Shaggy Dog, and Swiss Family Robinson, he became a poster boy for 1950s American innocence. But behind the Disney smile was a young man forced to hide a secret that would ultimately end his career and lead to years of personal despair. As Tommy reached his late teens, he began to privately acknowledge his homosexuality. In an era when even whispers of queerness could ruin a career, Tommy's truth became his professional death sentence. When Disney learned of a rumored relationship with another teen boy, the studio abruptly severed ties. He was blacklisted without any official reason, just quietly pushed aside by the very empire he helped build. Tommy struggled to find work after that. He acted in low-budget films, but the emotional toll was immense. He spiraled into substance abuse, battling heroin and other drugs throughout the 1960s and 70s. At one point, he was arrested for drug possession and disappeared from the public eye. In later years, Tommy cleaned up and found peace working as a carpet cleaner. He eventually embraced his identity and spoke candidly about the pain of being cast out by Hollywood. Still, he died alone in 2021 at age 79, in obscurity and far from the stardom he once embodied. Tommy Kirk's story is a profound tragedy, not just because of his fall from fame, but because of why it happened. His only crime was being himself, a reality that Hollywood refused to forgive. Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood's career began at just 4 years old. In Miracle on 34th Street, she became an icon of holiday cheer and childhood wonder. But even as she rose to become one of the most admired actresses of her generation, Natalie remained haunted by trauma, fears, and a sense of fragility that never left her. Her transition from child star to adult actress was rare and successful. Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and Splendor in the Grass cemented her legacy. But behind the success, she was battling demons, a controlling stage mother, deep insecurity, and a lifelong fear of deep water stemming from a prophecy given in childhood. On the night of November 29, 1981, during a boating trip with her husband Robert Wagner and co-star Christopher Walken, Natalie vanished. Her body was later found floating off Catalina Island. The cause of death, drowning. But questions swirled. Bruises on her body, inconsistent statements, and delayed rescue attempts fueled conspiracy theories. Was it an accident or something darker? The case was reopened decades later, with Wagner officially named a person of interest, but no charges were ever filed. Natalie's death at just 43 was sudden, chilling, and unresolved. What makes Natalie Wood's story so heartbreaking isn't just the mystery of her final hours. It's the sense that from childhood to adulthood, she was never quite in control of her own narrative. Her drowning became the final act in a life filled with haunting silences. Jonathan Brandis. Jonathan Brandis entered the industry as a child, doing commercials before landing roles in films like The Never-Ending Story 2, and eventually becoming a teen heartthrob in the 1990s. But many forget that his roots trace back to late 1980s network TV and soap operas, putting him on the tail end of the Golden Age's child star legacy. He had it all: a bright future, leading roles, adoring fans, and the pressure to never slip. But the 2000s weren't kind. Jonathan's biggest opportunity came with Sequest DSV, where he starred as the teenage computer genius Lucas Wolinchak. The show's cancellation was a blow. Hollywood's offers stopped coming. His dream of transitioning into serious adult roles collapsed. The fame dried up, but the expectations and internal pressure remained crushingly real. Depression quietly took hold. Those closest to him say he never stopped trying, writing screenplays, attending auditions, and hoping for a second chance. But the silence from casting directors grew louder. In November 2003, at just 27, Jonathan took his own life by hanging in his Los Angeles apartment. He left no note. His death devastated fans who had grown up with him and opened a wider conversation about mental health among young stars. Jonathan Brandis is remembered as a brilliant talent lost to an industry that often forgets how fragile its brightest lights can be. Judy Nugent. Judy Nugent began her acting career at age 6 and quickly became a staple in 1940s and 50s film and television. With expressive eyes and a natural charm, she appeared in Magnificent Obsession, Annette, and opposite James Stewart in The Man from Laramie. She wasn't a household name like Shirley Temple, but she had a steady, admired presence that suggested long-term stardom. Yet as Judy aged, the roles vanished. Her acting career peaked before she turned 18, and she struggled to transition into adult parts. By the 1960s, she faded from public life completely, becoming one of the many child stars swallowed up by Hollywood's obsession with youth. She married actor Buck Taylor and raised a family, retreating into normalcy but never quite escaping the shadow of her former fame. Though she avoided public scandal, friends noted she carried a quiet sadness, haunted by what could have been. She had little interest in revisiting her acting days, rarely giving interviews or making convention appearances. In 2023, Judy passed away at the age of 83. There was no public tribute, no grand farewell, just a brief notice and a life remembered only by those who look closely. Hers is a quieter tragedy, the kind not found in headlines but in the slow erosion of identity. She didn't crash and burn, she simply disappeared, like so many child stars who are celebrated early, then forgotten far too soon. Jackie Coogan. Before Shirley Temple and even Mickey Rooney, there was Jackie Coogan, Hollywood's original child superstar. Discovered by Charlie Chaplin and cast in the 1921 silent classic The Kid, Coogan's performance melted hearts around the world. He became one of the highest-paid actors of the 1920s, earning millions by today's standards before reaching puberty. But his tragedy was not found in early death. It was in betrayal. By the time Jackie turned 21, he discovered that his mother and stepfather had squandered nearly all his fortune. The very people meant to protect him had used his earnings to buy jewelry, cars, and lavish homes, insisting it was theirs since they raised him. Coogan sued, and though he eventually won, he received only a fraction of what he'd earned. The heartbreak was so severe that his name became attached to California's first major child labor law, the Coogan Act. His adult acting career never matched the glory of his childhood. While he found some success later as Uncle Fester on The Addams Family, he spent most of his life living in the shadow of what had been taken. Financial stress, emotional instability, and bitterness haunted him for decades. Jackie Coogan died in 1984 at the age of 69. Not forgotten but far from celebrated. His tragedy wasn't just what was lost. It was that his life became a cautionary tale before it became a legacy. He was the first, and in many ways, the first warning sign of just how dark child stardom could be. Beverly Washburn. Beverly Washburn made her screen debut before age 10 and became a familiar face in 1950s Hollywood. She appeared in classics like Old Yeller and The Loretta Young Show, admired for her emotional performances and innocent charm. But as the roles grew fewer and time marched on, Beverly began to fade from the screen and from public memory. Though she wasn't engulfed by scandal, Beverly later opened up about the deep loneliness and confusion that haunted her after Hollywood let her go. She spoke candidly about being sexualized as a young girl, exploited by photographers, and misled by agents who saw her only as a product. Her self-esteem collapsed. Depression followed. And though she tried other careers, she always felt like a ghost living outside the only world she'd ever known. Later in life, Beverly tried to reclaim her narrative by attending nostalgia conventions and writing a memoir. Yet even these attempts felt bittersweet, more about closure than celebration. She revealed that most of the golden moments fans remembered were accompanied by trauma and control behind the scenes. When Beverly died in 2022 at the age of 79, her passing made barely a ripple. For someone whose face once appeared in magazines across the country, her death was met with silence. Her tragedy wasn't drugs or violence, it was erasure. A girl once loved by millions was quietly forgotten, even as her stories begged to be remembered. Brenda Joyce. Brenda Joyce might not be the first name that comes to mind when talking about child stars, but her acting career began when she was barely a teenager, modeling and acting by 14. She rose to fame portraying Jane opposite Johnny Weissmuller and Lex Barker in the Tarzan films during the 1940s. Her beauty, poise, and strength made her a standout, one of the few actresses to play Jane opposite two different Tarzans. But despite her on-screen confidence, Brenda was deeply unhappy in the spotlight. She disliked the attention, detested the contracts, and resented being pigeonholed as nothing more than a jungle queen. After just a few years of stardom, she walked away from Hollywood completely. Few knew where she went. Fewer still seemed to care. She took a government job, working with immigration and refugee services, an extraordinary pivot for someone once considered a Hollywood glamour figure. But the world she entered was nothing like the movies. Bureaucracy, long hours, and personal isolation followed her into her later years. Brenda Joyce never returned to the limelight. She refused interviews and turned down fan conventions. Some say she wanted to erase that part of her life altogether. When she died in 2009 at the age of 92, her obituary barely mentioned her time as Jane. Her fame, once so luminous, had been tucked away like a costume she never wanted to wear again. Her tragedy lies in how deeply she wanted to be free from the image that once made her famous, how she ran from Hollywood only to disappear into a world that never truly understood who she was beneath the costume. Margaret O'Brien. Few child stars had a presence as commanding as Margaret O'Brien. A true prodigy, she earned acclaim in Meet Me in St. Louis in The Secret Garden, and her uncanny ability to cry on command stunned audiences and directors alike. In 1944, she won a Juvenile Academy Award, making her one of the most celebrated child performers of her time. But for all her acclaim, Margaret struggled immensely with the psychological demands placed on her. She was known for working 12-hour days, performing emotionally exhausting scenes again and again without complaint. Hollywood didn't ask her to be a child. It asked her to be a tool, and she complied. As she grew older, the work dried up. She had a few TV appearances and occasional stage work, but nothing ever matched the fame of her childhood. Like many child stars, Margaret felt discarded once she hit adolescence, like a doll no longer needed. Though she did not fall into addiction or crime, she admitted to struggling with depression and anxiety, stemming from a sense of loss and identity confusion. Who was she, if not the girl who cried on cue? Margaret eventually moved away from the spotlight, living a private life and avoiding most public appearances. When she died quietly in her later years, many were shocked to discover she'd still been alive. Her death went largely unreported. For a child who once held the nation's heartstrings in the palm of her hand, her exit from this world was hauntingly quiet. These stars once lit up Hollywood's golden screens, but behind the camera, their lives were filled with struggle, betrayal, and pain. From overdose to obscurity, each child carried the weight of fame in ways no one should have to. Fame gave them the spotlight, but rarely a happy ending. Let me know if you'd like a thumbnail concept, YouTube title ideas, or intro voiceover script to go with this series.